What's up, guys? GMoney here with my dog Tex. We're hanging out. Crazy session today. We get all in a bunch of times. Can we book a profit on this crazy table? I guess we're gonna find out. I created an Instagram and a Twitter. I'm gonna link them here if you want to follow me for more regular updates. Let's get into the hands here. We get to the lodge and we're on the list for PLO. There's 2 tables running today. While we wait, we play 1-3 Hold'em. We're in for 1,000. After 30 minutes, we're out for 1,100. We rack up, we head over to the PLO table, and start getting dealt some hands. We take our seat at the PLO table, and we already recognize a few players. We know that this game's going to be crazy action today. The first hand's a bomb pot, and we brick, so we folded. The second hand we're dealt King Queen 9-7, double suited in middle position. There's no straddle, there's 2 limpers to us, and we raised it to 25 in middle position. The low jack folds, hijack and cutoff call, button folds. The big blind under the gun now call as well. Under the gun +2, who I'd categorize as a maniac, raises to 105. We have a pretty straightforward call with a strong double suited hand here, so we call. The rest of the players call to the under the gun player, who shoves all in for 110. This doesn't reopen the pot, so everybody flicks in 5 more, and we're now headed 6 ways to a flop. The flop comes down King 9-9, and what can I say? I mean, I'm pretty much the best poker player ever. My second hand, I just flop a boat. Pretty easy game if you ask me. There's going to be some decisions to be made now that we have such a strong hand. We're only beat by pocket kings here because we block pocket 9s. We want to learn from our hand where we flopped quads in vlog number 1 and not get too aggressive into 5 opponents here. So when the big blind and under the gun check to us here, we check as well. It checks to the cutoff, who takes a stab for 200. He could have random 9x hands that aren't boated up yet. The only card we don't want to see is an ace, which means ace 9 would beat us. At this point in the hand, we're really never going to be folding, given that it's a 3-bet pot. It's most likely that if anyone has kings, it's going to be the cutoff, or under the gun +2 who 3-bet preflop. If they have kings, they have kings. I mean, nice hand at that point. Big blind and under the gun now fold, so it's back on us. We're just going to call here and give our opponent a chance to put his whole stack in on the turn. Should he not do that, we can easily bet the river. So we just call. The hijack calls as well. We're headed 3 ways to a turn. That comes in offsuit 4. I check, and it now checks around. The river's now the 4 of diamonds, so the flush gets there. And we have a real decision to make here. How big do we bet? We're definitely not checking here and giving our opponents the opportunity to check it through. My first instinct is to bet small, let's say 300, to get a crying call from a flush or a random 9x hand. But then as I think it through, 300 looks really value heavy. If we went all in, it almost looks like more of a bluff than betting small. And I think we're going to get the same amount of calls from a big bet that we do with a small bet. So I decide to jam. The hijack now thinks about it for quite some time. He asks the dealer for a count, and he does decide to call. The cutoff now snap folds. We say we got a boat. The hijack says, boat is good, nice hand. The under the gun +1 player, who was all in preflop, can't beat our hand either, and we're going to scoop a huge pot to start the session here. The cutoff player showed a 9 as he folded, and he said he didn't have a boat after the hand, so we don't really know what the hijack called us with. I would assume a flush of some sort, but oh well, we get a bunch of money. We collect our piles of chips from the dealer, we thank the poker gods, and we head to the next hand. Here's a quick stack update about an hour and a half into the session. We're at about 2,700. We changed seats so we can get a better angle of the action, and we look down at Queen 8-8 single suited on the button. There's a $10 straddle and 2 callers to us. We pot it to 55. The small blind straddle and both limpers now call, and we're headed 5 ways to a flop, which comes 8-3-4 with 2 clubs. And I mean, if you want to be great at poker, just flop the nuts every time. Pretty easy game when you do that. There's no straights available, but this is a wet and draw heavy board. Opponents could have straight draws, they could have flush draws, they could also have lower sets or 2 pair type hands. So when it checks to us, we definitely want to bet here for value and protection from all the draws. We bet 200. The small blind now pots it to 880. This is a sight we love to see. It folds around to us, and we have one option. We're just going to put all the money in here. We run it twice, and our opponent shows that he has a wrap and a flush draw. This situation is pretty much a coin flip. The first run out comes the ace of spades and the king of clubs. So our opponent hits his wrap on the first board, and we're going to lose to a straight. The second board comes the four of clubs and the four of spades. So we have top full house on that board, and we're going to chop this one up. Always lame to chop, but better than losing, and we're on to the next hand. In this next hand, we look down at ace, queen, queen, 10 with 3 clubs in the $10 straddle. There's a call from middle position, a raise from the low jack to 35. The hijack calls. It folds to the maniac in the small blind, who pots it to 165. Now, this guy's been raising a lot. I mean, probably around 90% of the cards he's dealt, he raises in some fashion. And he's probably 3-betting around 60%. He just went all in pre with king jack 7-5 with 3 to a suit. So it folds to us, and there's one short stack behind and 2 bigger stacks. I don't think we just want to call here and invite the bigger stacks into the pot. So I want to raise. I could pot it, but I think a smaller bet will have the same effect to fold out the big stacks and ISO the small stacks in this hand that I want to get it all in with now. So I bet 500. The middle position now calls all in for 260, and it folds around to the maniac, who goes all in for 545. We obviously call, and our plan worked to perfection. We run it once, and we get no improvement on the board. We say we just have queens, and the maniac says, I have aces. So we run into it here, and our table mates are in as much disbelief as we are that he actually has it this time.
How do you have aces there?
Yeah, I know.
How do you have aces there?
I know, I had the ace too.
How does he have aces there? He's not supposed to have aces there. You're not supposed to have aces there.
Well, sometimes the maniacs are going to have it, and we're on to the next hand. We look down at a monster in this hand. We have ace, ace, king 10 double suited. They really don't come much better than this. We're in the $10 straddle. Under the gun calls, the low jack calls. The hijacks, who's an aggressive and winning regular, raises it up to 50. The button calls. We're definitely going to be putting in the 3-bet here. We pot it to 225. The low jack, hijack, and button call. So we're headed 4 ways to a flop, which comes pretty terrible for our hand. It's jack, jack 3 with 2 spades. So we take another look at our cards. They're really good looking, but it's pretty likely one of our opponents is going to have a jack. If it was a pair board, say 4-4-3, we might have more of a decision to bet here on the flop. It's less likely our opponents will have low cards. Considering we're 3 ways, we are going to find a lot of checks on paired boards with our aces here. We don't even have good backup like a flush draw. So we check. The low jack now snap jams. It folds around to us, and we aren't going to be able to continue here. So we fold. We show the table our pretty hand. Our table mates admire it.
Ooh, that's pretty.
The opponent shows a jack, and we're on to the next hand. We now look down at another solid starting hand in the big blind. Ace, king, jack 10 with 3 hearts. There's a $10 straddle. There's 4 limpers to the small blind, who pots it to 75. We elect to call. I think in some instances we could raise here, but the small blind hasn't been raising much pre-flop. So I think if we raise, there's a decent chance we could run into aces here. Our hand also plays straightforward on most flops. So we call, the straddle calls, middle position goes all in for 140, the button folds, and 3 other players call. We're headed 5 ways to the flop, which comes 6, jack, 7, rainbow. We're not going to want to bet our top pair, top kicker here. Our opponents could have sets or 2 pairs. So we check, and the flop checks around. The turn is the jack of diamonds, so we improve to trips with the ace kicker. I don't think if we bet, we can get worse hands to call at this point. Maybe another jack could call, but we can definitely get value from a jack on the river. Or somebody with a jack might value bet with a worse kicker. So we check, and the turn checks around. The river's now the 3 of spades. It's time for us to go for some value. We bet 225. All of the opponents fold. We have to show our hand to beat the middle position player who was all in pre-flop. We show it, it's the winner, and we're going to take down about a $600 profit in this one. If you came for action, this hand won't disappoint. I looked down at King 10-10-9 with King Eye Spades on the button. There's no straddle in this hand. There's 3 limps to us. I make it 30. The small blind, who's a short stack, raises it to 115. Big blind under the gun +2. The low jack and myself call, so we're headed 5 ways to a flop, which comes Jack Queen 7 with 2 clubs. We flop a monster wrap here. Any 8, 9, 10, king, or ace will give us a straight. If we account for the 3 outs that are in our hand and the 1 club, we think there are 12 clean outs in this spot. The low jack now makes things interesting and goes all in for 650. So we're getting about 2-1 on our call here. We could even assume that at least one of our opponents will have the flush draw, which accounts for 2 more of the cards in the deck, so we're getting really good odds to continue here. We call and the big blind calls. We're now headed 3 ways to a turn, which comes the bink, ace of spades, let's go. We make the nuts in a huge pot here. Our opponent in the big blind now checks to us, and our decision is super obvious here. We're all in. The big blind calls for 400 more. We decide to run it twice, and both runouts are blanks. We flip our hand. 2 of our opponents show flush draws, so they were blocking each other's outs. The player in middle position, it seems like she either had a flush draw or a set type of hand, but we're going to scoop it here because nobody is going to chop with us. We now rake in mountains of chips, and it takes us a few minutes to assemble them all. Let's go. The very next hand, we win another small pot, and our stack's now up to 4,700. In this next hand, we look down at King, King, Queen 10 with 3 spades. There's a $10 straddle. Under the gun opens to 35. We call in middle position. There's 6 other callers, and we're headed 8 ways to a flop, which comes down 7, Jack, Deuce, Rainbow. There's 1 spade, meaning we have backdoor flush potential. There's also a jack, meaning we have significant backdoor straight potential. Any ace, king, queen, 10, 9 is going to give us a straight draw. There's 280 in the pot. I don't think leading into the field here makes much sense. So we check. It checks to the hijack, who pots it to 280. It folds back to us, and now we're left with the low jack and the hijack, who are both short stacks. We could just call, hoping to pick up more equity on the turn. We could also fold, but we decide to put these 2 players all in essentially. We bet 500. The low jack folds. The hijack goes all in for 530. And we make the call. We see that she has a set of 7s. And we're headed to 2 runouts. There's no help on either runout. And looking back at this hand, this was just a punt. We should have just either called or folded. Honestly, folding is probably the best option here. When we look at the equities against what we would get it in against, a set or 2 pair, we're doing terribly. Considering we went 8 ways to the flop, it's going to be very likely that one of our opponents has something, and when our opponent bets pot, she's basically saying she has a strong hand. To get the right odds here, we would need a flush draw and a straight draw on the flop here to get the right odds. So we punt. All we can do is learn from this one, and we're going to get a $500 lesson here, and we're on to the next hand. In this next hand, we look down at a monster starting hand, an ace, king, queen, 10, double suited. There's a $10 straddle. Under the gun +2 calls. We raise it to 45. Hijack, button, small blind, straddle, and the limper now call, and we're headed 6 ways to a flop. The flop comes down 10 ace 3 with 2 clubs, so we flop top 2 and a club draw. Extremely strong hand. We can make nut flushes, we can make straights, we can make full houses. We're definitely going to be betting when it checks to us here, and we bet 250. The hijack now calls all in for 155. The straddle now calls for 250. And we're headed to a turn, heads up for a side pot. The turn's the 9 of diamonds. The straddle now checks to us. We think about this for a bit. We could bet here. We have a very strong draw and a strong mate hand. If we bet, I think we can get called by two pair hands that are worse than ours because we have top two. We could also get called by maybe worse flush draws. She could have a hand like Jack, Queen, King that has a straight draw. She could also have sets, pocket threes, or even a turn pocket nines. Tens are also possible, but unlikely because there's two tens accounted for. After some deliberation, I think that I don't hate any river cards, and I'm playing in position so I could always bet the river should we get a favorable card. So I decided to check it back. The river now comes the king of spades, so we still have top two pair, but ace king now. This does bring straights with jack queen. I'm not hating this card. The straddle now bets 200. I don't see any value in raising, so I flick in the call. We show ace king, and we're good. It seems like our opponent was on a lower flush draw, so in hindsight, a bet on the turn might have been much more profitable. But we scoop an $800 profit in this one, and we're on to the next hand. Quick stack update, we're sitting on about 4,500 now. In this next hand, we look down at ace, king, queen, queen, badoogie. There's a $10 and $20 straddle on. We open to 75 in the hijack. The cutoff calls. The button who's a short stack goes all in for 160. Folds back around to us. The cutoff player is also a short stack, has about 500. We're just going to pot it here. We have a pretty strong hand, so we pot it to 495. The cutoff folds, and we're going to run the board out one time. We're up against 9987 with 3 clubs. We got the money in good. The flop comes 6-5-2 with 2 clubs. Our opponent flops a monster, and we're going to have to fade his outs. The turn's the 5 of diamonds. We're still in the lead. And the river comes the 8 of hearts. Oh, he hits a straight. So we're going to lose a small one. But we got the money in good. And we're on to the next hand. Alright, crazy action in this next hand. We look down at ace, jack, jack 10 with ace high spades in the $10 straddle. Middle position, hijack, cutoff, and the button all limp. It's now in the big blind. And he's acting kind of weird. He's thinking about it. And he ultimately calls. We're definitely going to raise it. We have quite a strong hand here. So we raise it to 60. Hijack and button call. The big blind now pots it to 335. And it's kind of weird because he's saying he has a hand like aces or kings. And it's weird that he wouldn't have potted that considering I was the $10 straddle. And since I was the only player left to act, I'm kind of suspicious of how strong his hand actually is here. Our hand will also leave us with straightforward decisions on the flop. So it's a pretty clear-cut call here. I don't think re-raising accomplishes anything because we would just isolate the top of his range. We call, and the hijack calls as well. We're headed 3 ways to a flop that comes ace 5-3 with 2 spades. So we flop a monster, we have top pair, and a nut flush draw. The only hand we're doing poorly against is going to be aces, or another set. But even then, we have significant equity to our flush. We also have equity to a jack, and backdoor straight potential with the jack 10. The big blind now goes all in for 1,055. There's over 1,000 in the middle, so we're getting about 2 to 1 on a call here. If he has aces, we're getting slightly under the odds we need, but he could have a hand like ace-king, or maybe kings with a lower flush draw. So against his full range, I think we have the odds to call here. We also block aces, so all things considered, we're going to call here. The hijack calls for less, he has 175, so there's huge side pot and a smaller main pot, but it's still significant. We head to 1 run out. These guys only want to run it once. The turn comes the 9 of hearts, and the river comes the 3 of diamonds. The one opponent tables ace-5 2-pair, and the big stack tables ace-king. So we're going to lose here, but we were actually 45% to win this hand. We had the best odds of winning 3 ways. So we get the money in good. We're not going to win it. If we could have won this one, we would have been up over $6,000 on the session. Alas, we're not, and we're going to be on to the next hand. We run bad in the last couple of hands. Can we win this one to end the session? We look down at ace-ace, king-10, rainbow. There's a $10 straddle. We open to 35 in middle position. Low jack, hijack, cutoff, small blind, and the straddle call. So we're headed 6 ways to a flop, which is an interesting one. It comes down 5-5-5. So we have the best possible boat. We only lose to a 5, which is definitely likely with 6 players being in the hand. The small blind leads into the field for 50. It folds to us. We're not going to fold yet, but there's no value in raising here. Because he's kind of saying he has a 5. He could have a hand like kings, queens, jacks that's trying to get some thin value here. So we just call. The turn's now the 3 of clubs. It goes check, check. Now into the river, which is the 3 of spades. So we're still only losing to a 5. We beat all other full houses. The opponent now checks it to us, and I don't think he'd be checking a 5 twice. So we're going to go for some value here. We bet 100. Our opponent reaches for chips, and as he flicks in the call, he says aces are good. We say we got aces, and we show him. He says he has kings, and we're going to take this one down to end the session. Here's us racking up our $3,200 in chips. We take down a $2,200 plus profit today. Feels good.
Exciting session today. We connected with a lot of flops. Would have loved to win that ace-jack hand, but hey, we banked the ace with the wrap. We won a few other big pots, and we flopped a boat in our second hand. We won 2,200, so nothing to complain about today. If you like this video, please click that subscribe button to see more. I appreciate everyone who's been doing it. It helps me out a lot. See you in the next vlog.